My son changed the locks while I was at the hospital, but forgot the house was still in my name. The next time he came home, a new family was living there. I stood in front of the house I had lived in for over 35 years, the one I'd scrubbed clean, painted twice, paid off down to the last cent. But today, the key didn't fit. At first, I thought it was just my fingers trembling. The hospital had released me only a few hours earlier. My right hip still ached from the fall, and the pain meds hadn't quite kicked in. I shifted my weight, tried the key again. It slid in this time, but didn't turn. I looked up. The doorknob was different, shinier. The old one had a little scratch from when Daniel, my son, tried to carve his name into it with a house key when he was 7. That scar was gone now. This handle had no memory. I rang the bell. Nothing. No sound. I stepped back and noticed the doorbell itself had been replaced, too. New frame, new casing, a different chime. Still, I waited. The sun was hot above me. The concrete under my feet cracked from too many summers. I pressed the doorbell again, holding my breath like I had so many times before when Daniel was little, hoping he'd come running, grinning, calling Mom. This time, the door didn't open, so I called his cell. The screen glowed, Daniel Mobile. He answered on the 3rd ring. Hello? Daniel, I said, trying to steady my voice. It's me. I'm outside. The key, your key, it doesn't work. A pause. Who is this? It's Mom, I said softly. I just got back. They discharged me this morning. I took a cab straight home. He cut me off. I'm sorry, he said, and his voice was flat, distant, like a stranger reading from a script. I don't know who this is, but my mother passed away 3 weeks ago. My knees buckled slightly. I gripped the iron gate for support. Daniel, what are you saying? Silence. Then, whoever you are, pretending to be her, it's sick. You need help. I could hear someone in the background, a woman's voice, muffled, then sharp. Hang up. Don't engage. I don't know what game you're playing, Daniel said, colder now, but don't call this number again. And then he hung up. I stood there, phone still against my ear, hearing nothing but the empty dial tone. 3 weeks ago, that's when I was admitted to the hospital. A neighbor had found me lying on the bathroom floor after I slipped and hit my head on the sink. The EMTs said I was lucky. My hip was fractured, not shattered. I'd be walking again within a month, they promised. No one visited me. Not Daniel, not his wife, not even a text. But I had told myself they were busy, probably didn't even know I was in the hospital, that when I came home, things would return to normal. That illusion ended now, right here, under this sky, in front of the house I had cleaned after flu seasons, after birthday parties, after heartbreaks. The house I had once mortgaged again to pay for Daniel's braces, the house where I'd stayed up sewing his Halloween costumes by hand. Now, I wasn't even allowed inside. My hands were shaking. A neighbor passed by on a bike, nodding politely, unaware that the woman standing at the gate, dressed in clean slacks and a wrinkled cardigan, had just been declared dead by her only child. The lock gleamed at me, unbothered. The porch light had been changed too, motion sensor now. I stepped back and it blinked on. Bright, harsh, cold. Like him, like Daniel, the boy I had nursed through asthma attacks, the boy I had taught how to ride a bike in this very driveway, the boy I had fed, clothed, loved, and who now refused to acknowledge I existed. I didn't cry. I wish I could say I did, that I collapsed right there, weeping into my handbag like some tragic figure in a made-for-TV movie. But I didn't. I stood up straighter. I put the phone back in my purse, and I stared at the house until my feet stopped trembling. Inside those walls was my chair, my recipes, my wedding photo, the quilt I made when I was pregnant with Daniel, folded neatly at the foot of the guest bed. But I wasn't welcome anymore. He had changed the locks, and in doing so changed something else, something deeper, more permanent. I turned away, My reflection stared back at me from the dark glass of the living room window, an old woman with tired eyes and a cane. Someone forgotten, someone erased. I took a slow breath and walked back to the curb, not knowing yet that this moment wasn't the end. It was the beginning. 2 hours. That's how long I stood in the sun-drenched corner of the parking lot outside his office building, my cane balanced against the curb, my purse held tight against my chest like a shield. I had called the front desk to ask if Daniel was in. They said he was in meetings. I waited anyway. I could have left. I should have. But I needed to see his face. I needed to believe that the voice on the phone wasn't his, that there had been a mistake, that once he saw me, he'd run toward me, arms open, horrified by what he'd said. But when the glass doors slid open and he stepped out, the illusion cracked. He was laughing, wearing a navy blazer, phone in hand, beside his wife, Melissa. They looked polished, confident, unbothered. I straightened up, smoothed my blouse. My heart pounded against my ribs like it was trying to break free. He spotted me. His eyes narrowed. The laughter died. Melissa saw me next, her lips pursed into a tight, annoyed line. Daniel's steps slowed, then stopped. His brows furrowed, but not with concern, with calculation. "Mom," he said, walking closer. But his voice wasn't warm. It was wary. I smiled, just a little. "Daniel, I need to talk to you. Just a moment. Please." He sighed. People were coming and going around us, suits, clipboards, lattes. None of them noticed the mother standing there clinging to her dignity. "Mom," he said louder now, "you can't just show up like this. You're making a scene." I blinked. "Daniel, I just came back from the hospital. The door was locked. You changed the locks. I don't understand. Why would you do that?" He looked away for a second, jaw clenched. Melissa stepped forward. "The house is ours now," she said crisply. "You weren't living there anymore. We needed the space." "Space?" I repeated. "Melissa, I was gone for 3 weeks because I broke my hip. That house? It's still my—" Daniel cut in, his voice low but firm. "Mom, let's not do this here." "Then where?" I asked. "Where can I talk to my own son?" He glanced over his shoulder. A few coworkers were watching now. Then, softly, he said, "You don't live there anymore. That's our family home now. You should think about finding a place that suits your situation better." I stared at him. "My situation? You're older, Mom. You need care. You can't keep living on your own." Melissa chimed in, crossing her arms. "We've been researching assisted living, some really nice places. You'll have your own space, meals, activities." My lips trembled. "You mean a nursing home?" Daniel rubbed his temples. "It's not like that." Tears welled in my eyes. "Daniel, I built that house. I paid the mortgage. I painted the walls. I planted every single rose bush in that yard. You took your first steps in that living room. That's the only home I've ever known." He stared at me for a long moment, then looked down at his watch like I was a burden on his time. "Mom," he said, voice hardening, "don't make this ugly. Just let it go. Move on." My throat tightened. "I'm your mother, Daniel, your real mother. Flesh and blood. How could you do this to me?" He laughed. It was dry, sharp, cruel. "Let's be real," he said coldly. "You're just some old woman now, a liability. You want the truth? You're a leech. You drain people. I'm done pretending you're still useful." The words hit like a fist. Melissa didn't even flinch. She folded her arms tighter. "You've got 2 options," he said, stepping forward now, close enough for me to see the disgust in his eyes. 1, you go to a home quietly. 2, I'll have you committed. You want to talk about that fall in the bathroom? I'll tell them you're unstable, that you forgot where you were, that you hallucinate." My heart stopped. He leaned in. "They'll believe me. I have power of attorney, remember?" My knees buckled. I reached for the cane. Melissa stepped forward. "Daniel, let's go," she snapped. "We're late." And then, as she brushed past me, she pushed. Not hard, but enough. My feet tangled. I slipped, fell. The concrete scraped my palms. My purse flew open, papers scattering onto the ground. My cane clattered next to the car tire. Daniel didn't move. Melissa didn't look back. No one helped me up. I lay there, staring at the sky, blue, perfect, mocking, wondering how I had ever called that man my son. People say your children are your legacy. That day, mine tried to erase me. The motel room smelled faintly of bleach and old pine cleaner, a mix that clung to the curtains and settled into the rough bedspread like memories that refused to fade. I sat on the edge of the bed, my cane propped against the chipped nightstand, and pulled the old leather folder from my bag, the one with the cracked corners and the faint scent of lavender oil I used to dab on letters decades ago. Inside were the papers that had traveled with me through every season of my life. I unfolded them slowly, the creases deep from years of being untouched. Yellowed utility bills, a copy of my nursing license, long expired but still bearing my maiden name, the deed to the house, my house, and beneath it all a photo. Daniel at age 4, smiling with chocolate on his chin and both hands clutching a teddy bear I'd rescued from a church sale for 50 cents. I hadn't meant to cry, but there it was, hot, silent grief spilling from the corners of my eyes as I stared at that child, the one who used to call me Mama with sticky fingers and a runny nose, the one who used to beg for one more bedtime story, even after I'd worked a double shift and my legs throbbed like they were filled with gravel. The pain of what had happened outside that office building burned in my chest, but it wasn't the worst pain I'd known. No, that came years before, when I was 32 and a widow. Daniel's father died in a factory collapse. The scaffolding buckled. He was buried beneath steel and silence. They brought me his wedding ring in a plastic bag and told me he hadn't felt a thing. They didn't know what came after, a mortgage I couldn't afford, a toddler who didn't understand death, and a future that shrank like cold fabric in the wash. I took night shifts at the hospital, wiped blood from tile floors, held the hands of dying strangers while my son slept 2 rooms away, unaware that his mother had learned to cry without making a sound. There were months I lived on canned beans and instant coffee so Daniel could have new shoes for school. Years I patched the same winter coat until the lining was more thread than fabric. And then, the house. It wasn't much. A 1-story with squeaky floors and cracked baseboards. But it was ours. I put down the deposit with the money I earned sewing extra shifts together like seams in a wound. I painted the walls myself, planted roses along the walkway despite the arthritis that had started to settle into my knuckles. I remember the day we moved in. Daniel was 8. He ran from room to room, shouting, "Is this one mine?" like he couldn't believe he'd get his own door, his own window, his own place to dream. I didn't tell him we'd have to eat oatmeal for dinner for the next 6 weeks just to afford the first mortgage payment. That house was more than bricks. It was a promise, a testament, a shrine to everything I'd survived. When Daniel graduated high school, we took a photo on the front porch. I wore a blue dress I'd found on sale, and he wore the same crooked tie he'd worn to his first dance. He hugged me tight, looked me in the eye, and said, "You're the reason I got here, Mom. You're my rock, my heart. This house, it's because of you." I believed him. Even on his wedding day, when Melissa's family took every front row seat and left me in the 3rd row beside the punch bowl, I still told myself it was love, that he was just overwhelmed, that he'd come back to me. I held on to that belief, like a candle in the wind, until he changed the locks, until he told the world I was dead, until he watched me fall and didn't lift a finger. I stared at the folder in my lap, at the deed with my name on it, and wondered how something that felt so permanent could become so fragile, how a son who once ran to me crying when he scraped his knee now looked at me like I was a burden too heavy to carry, how a woman who gave everything could become invisible. 30 years of silence, of sacrifice, of saying yes when I should have said no. And now I was a ghost outside my own home. My fingers traced the edge of the photo again. Daniel, the boy with the gummy smile, the boy who made me believe I could be more than my grief, the boy who once whispered, "I love you more than the stars." That boy was gone. In his place stood a man who called me dead, who watched his wife push me and did nothing, who stood on a foundation I had poured with my own hands and dared to claim it as his. I folded the papers back into the folder, stood slowly and looked around the motel room. Nothing here was mine, but at least I knew what was. That house was still mine. And it was time they remembered that. It was a quiet morning, too quiet, the kind where you can hear the sigh of the walls and the groan of your own thoughts. I stood in front of the small fireproof box I had dragged out from the bottom of the motel closet, my fingers trembling not from age, but from purpose. The key was still tucked inside the lining of my purse, the same purse I'd carried to every hospital shift, every PTA meeting, every funeral and graduation. I turned the lock slowly, let the click echo in the room like a drumbeat. Inside, beneath a stack of expired IDs and my wedding ring wrapped in velvet, was the red folder, the deed, my name, in ink that had not faded, Margaret Langley, sole proprietor. No signed nods, no transfers, no trusts. The house, the one I had bled for, sacrificed for, built a life inside, was still mine. Legally, entirely. I sat down at the tiny motel desk, the one with the chipped edge and the fake wood grain, and I opened my laptop. I hadn't used it since before the fall, but the muscle memory was still there. Username, password, log in. I searched for the name I remembered from years ago, Kelsey Tran-esque. She had been a bright young paralegal fresh out of school when I met her. Her grandmother had been one of my patients. Back then, she'd brought me tea during overnight shifts. Now, she was a practicing attorney with her own small office downtown. I sent her a message with a subject line that read, "Urgent, property rights." She called within the hour. "Ms. Langley?" she asked, voice still calm and warm. "Is everything all right?" I told her everything. Not all the feelings, not yet, but the facts. She didn't gasp. She didn't say, "How could a son do that?" She just asked for the address, the dates, the paperwork. And then she said, "Come in tomorrow. We'll fix this." The next day I walked into her office with the red folder under my arm. She looked older, yes, but still sharp, still kind. She reviewed the deed, scanned the title records, and looked up at me. "Margaret, the house is yours," she said. "Every legal document confirms it. There's no transfer, no co-ownership, no lien. If he changed the locks and claimed possession, he committed unlawful occupation. We can file for immediate action." I nodded slowly. "I want the locks changed," I said. "I want a new tenant." She tilted her head. "Are you sure?" "Yes," I replied. "I'm not going back there to live, but I won't let him take what isn't his." She drew up the paperwork that day. First, the termination of any prior powers of attorney. Then, a cease and desist letter, a formal notice of property reclamation, and finally, my favorite part, a public rental listing, charming 3-bedroom home available immediately for rent. Quiet neighborhood. Ideal for respectful, family-minded tenants. Preference given to single parents or multi-generational households. Must appreciate rose gardens. Kelsey smiled when she read it back to me. "Anyone in mind?" "Someone who still knows what a home is," I said. "Not just a place to sleep or decorate, but a place you honor." That afternoon, the papers were filed with the city. The letters were couriered to Daniel's workplace and his last known address. Within 72 hours, my locks would be replaced, the house would be legally reclaimed, and Daniel, he would be served. I sat in Kelsey's office long after the documents were signed, staring out the window at the courthouse across the street. My reflection looked back at me. Older, yes, but no longer trembling. There was steel in my shoulders again. He thought I'd fade, that I'd shrink in shame and shuffle into the shadows. But he forgot one thing. That house wasn't his inheritance. It was my backbone. It had held me through winters with no heat, summers with no air conditioning, nights with no sleep. It had held my grief, my pride, my son's laughter, and now it would hold justice. And I? I was no longer asking to be let back in. I was taking back the keys. It was a warm Sunday afternoon, the kind that smelled faintly of cut grass and distant barbecue smoke, the kind of day that once meant lemonade on the porch, crossword puzzles in the shade, and Daniel's laughter echoing down the hallway. But not this Sunday. This Sunday, Daniel came home and found it no longer was. I wasn't there to see it in person, but the new tenant, Mr. Thompson, called me later with a tone caught somewhere between politeness and disbelief. He was banging on the door like he expected it to open by magic, he told me. Didn't even knock first, just started twisting the handle like it belonged to him. It didn't, not anymore. Earlier that week I had signed the rental agreement. Mr. Thompson was a retired school principal, widowed, raising his teenage grandson. He'd seen the ad, called me with a voice that reminded me of an old radio announcer. Respectful, calm, honest. I liked him instantly. When I handed him the keys, he had tears in his eyes. "Are you sure?" he asked. "This is a beautiful home." "I'm sure," I said. "Just treat it like it mattered to someone once." And now, only 5 days later, Daniel stood outside that same house, dumbfounded to find the lock no longer obeyed him. The gate had been changed too. New keypad, new code, no more click of a familiar latch. He stood there in his crisp button-down shirt and sunglasses, still dressed like he had a reputation to protect. He pressed the doorbell, and it sang out a gentle chime. The door opened. Mr. Thompson looked him up and down calmly. "Can I help you?" he asked. Daniel blinked. Yeah? I'm here to see my mom." There was a pause. Mr. Thompson smiled. "She doesn't live here." Daniel's voice shifted. "This is my house." "No," Mr. Thompson replied, still pleasant. "This house belongs to Margaret Langley. I'm her tenant, and you are—" There was something delicious in the pause that followed. "I'm her son," Daniel snapped. "She's confused. I don't know what kind of scam—" "I don't think she's confused at all," Mr. Thompson said, folding his arms. Daniel tried to peer past him. The living room was visible through the open door. Same bay windows, same wooden floors, but the furniture was different. The curtains were new, and still, in the corner, stood the upright piano I had refused to part with, even when we couldn't afford electricity. I'd taught Daniel to play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star on those very keys, and there, on the shelf above the fireplace, sat a frame, a photo of me in my garden, holding a basket of roses, and beside it, the embroidered sign I had stitched by hand 27 years ago, "Bless this home." He stared at it. For a moment his mouth hung open. Then the anger came. "What the hell is this?" he snapped. "Where's my mom? Where's my stuff?" Mr. Thompson raised an eyebrow. "Nothing of yours was here. Not when I moved in. You can't just— She can't just. This is illegal." Mr. Thompson stepped outside now, closing the door gently behind him. "Son," he said with a voice that didn't rise, "you may want to talk to a lawyer before you start shouting on someone else's porch." Daniel fumed. "She's insane," he muttered. "She's old, she's confused, she's the legal owner," Mr. Thompson cut in, "and from what I understand, she's sharper than you think." Daniel stood there, deflated, his pride leaking out with every breath. I imagined the scene as he finally turned away. No key to twist, no door to push open, no welcome waiting on the other side. Just the sound of his own footsteps echoing on the sidewalk that used to lead him home. But now it led nowhere. And inside, a new family was settling in. A man who watered the roses, a grandson who played the same piano Daniel once had, a house that still whispered memories, but to someone who listened. That evening, I sat in my small apartment with a cup of tea and my feet tucked beneath an old quilt. My phone buzzed once. A message. From Daniel. Went by the house. What the hell is going on, Mom? I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't owe him an answer. He had made his decision the day he changed the locks. Today, I simply returned the favor. The first message came at 6:42. I saw the screen light up beside my bed before I even opened my eyes. I didn't need to read the name. I knew who it was. Mom, I'm sorry. I stared at the words for a moment, thumb hovering over the screen, then set the phone back down. No reply. By noon there were 3 more. I didn't know the house was still in your name. We thought the paperwork was already switched over. It was Melissa's idea. She pushed for it. I just went along with it. Blame, scattered and vague like a child spilling a glass of milk and pointing at the wind. I sat at the window with my tea, watching a pigeon hop along the edge of the courtyard. It pecked at crumbs and twitched at shadows. I thought about how many times I had watched Daniel do the same as a boy. Dart from corner to corner of our kitchen, tugging on my apron, asking for, "Just one more cookie, Mom, please." That boy was gone. By evening, my phone buzzed again. "We're having a hard time, okay? Melissa's job isn't stable. Rent is high. The baby's been sick. We need that house." There it was. Need. Not love, not remorse, not, "How are you?" Just need. I placed the phone face down and returned to my crossword puzzle. 6 letters, starts with V, means unspoken pain. I smiled. Vacant. Fitting. 2 days later, a bouquet arrived at my door. White lilies, my least favorite flower. Too funereal, too self-important. No note, no name. I left it outside. By dusk, the petals began to brown. The next message was longer, 7 lines in total. I was scared. You being in the hospital, it shook me. I didn't know if you'd make it. Melissa thought it would be better to move on. We didn't mean to hurt you. Please, can we talk? Please, Mom. I read it twice, then deleted it. My silence wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. For years I had answered every call, every favor, every half-hearted invitation. I had shown up to baby showers, mailed checks on birthdays, pretended not to notice when they seated me at the far table or forgot to list my name on the announcement. I had excused and absorbed and swallowed more than any heart should have to. And still, when I lay in a hospital bed alone, he didn't come. But now that the locks had changed for him, now that someone else stood where he thought he'd plant his flag, now he remembered my number. I didn't reply to the 7th message either. I let the bouquet rot on the welcome mat of someone else's house. I brewed tea with honey, curled beneath my quilt, and read a novel with no mother character. Just a woman, whole, flawed, free. At some point that night, my phone buzzed one last time. Just tell me what I need to do to fix this. But there are some things silence answers better than words, and some wounds that close, not because they were mended, but because they were no longer open. He came on a Tuesday. The knock was hesitant. 3 short taps, followed by silence. Not the kind of knock Daniel used to make as a boy when he forgot his keys and knew I'd be waiting just behind the door with a smile and a towel for his wet hair. This knock was older, heavier, ashamed. I opened the door and there he stood, my son. Hands in his pockets, shirt wrinkled, hair uncombed. He looked like someone who hadn't been sleeping well, not that I asked. "Mom," he said, eyes downcast. "Can I come in?" I didn't move, didn't answer. He took that as permission and stepped inside. My apartment wasn't much, a simple 2-room space with second-hand furniture, thrift store curtains, and a tea kettle that sang when it boiled. But it was mine. Every item had been chosen because it comforted me, not because it fit someone else's taste. He looked around like he was seeing me for the first time. "This place is..." He trailed off. "Small? Modest? Beneath you?" He didn't finish. Instead, he sat down at the edge of the armchair, like a man waiting in a clinic. Back straight, eyes tired, words rehearsed. "Melissa doesn't know I'm here," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "She doesn't know I changed the locks," he added. "She thought you gave us the house. I let her believe that." Of course he did. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. "I panicked," he said. "You were in the hospital and I thought, what if you didn't make it? We'd be stuck. No will, no deed, no plan. She was pressing me. I was scared. Scared." That was the word he chose. Not cruel, not selfish, just scared. He looked up at me, waiting for something, pity maybe, a softening. Instead, I walked to the drawer by the kitchen and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I handed it to him. He stared at it. His face changed. It was a photocopy of the 5-year lease I'd signed with Mr. Thompson. Dates, terms, initials, everything legal and binding. "Effective immediately," I said softly. "The house is no longer available for family use." He blinked. "So? That's it?" "That's it." He looked down again, jaw clenching. "I thought maybe you'd—" "Let me explain." "You just did." He folded the paper in half, then again. His hands were shaking. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he said. "I thought I was doing what needed to be done." I nodded once. He looked up. "That's all?" he asked. I met his gaze. My voice was calm, steady. "You said it once," I told him, "that I was your home, that everything you were started with me." He didn't deny it. "Well," I continued, "you've made your own home now, one where I don't belong. And that's fine. But you don't get to come back just because it's convenient." He opened his mouth, closed it. I walked to the door. He stood slowly, as if the weight of his choices had finally caught up with him. At the threshold, he turned. "You're really not going to forgive me?" I didn't smile, didn't frown. "I already have," I said, "but that doesn't mean I'm coming back." He nodded. Just once. A small, resigned motion, the kind people make when they realize the fight is over and they lost. He stepped outside, paused. Then I said it, quiet but clear. "I used to be the house you came home to, Daniel. Now I'm just the landlord." And then I closed the door, not in anger, not in hate, but in peace. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting on the other side. The smell of garlic and rosemary drifted through the little apartment like a memory I chose to keep. The table was set with mismatched plates and napkins folded into triangles. A simple blue tablecloth draped across it, the one with tiny sunflowers stitched in each corner. I had found it in a thrift shop the week before and bought it for no other reason than that it made me smile. Tonight was dinner. Not a celebration, not a holiday. Just a night I chose. 6 guests, all women, all over 60, all survivors of one kind or another. There was Helen, who'd once been forced out of her daughter's house when she became too much work. There was Darlene, whose son sold her car without asking and told her she was safer not driving. There was Estelle, whose only crime had been outliving her usefulness in a family that valued appearances over people. And then there was me. We brought dishes like offerings to an altar, warm bread, roasted vegetables, lemon cake. Someone brought wine, someone else brought tears. No one apologized for either. The apartment filled with the sounds I'd missed for years. Forks clinking, laughter that went unshushed, stories told without fear of judgment. No one asked for permission to speak. No one waited to be acknowledged. For once, we weren't being hosted. We were simply seen. After dinner, I brought out the old teapot, the one Daniel used to call the genie lamp. It still whistled when it boiled. The sound made someone laugh and someone else cry. We sat under the string lights I had taped across the ceiling beams. Not fancy, but warm. Intimate, like fireflies in a jar. Helen raised her glass. "To the forgotten," she said. Estelle added, "To the ones who were asked to leave the house, but never left the love." I smiled, and I raised my own glass. to the women who were told they were too much, too loud, too old, too expensive, and to the truth they carry quietly. We clinked, and I felt something rise in my chest. Not sadness, not rage, something lighter, peace. After they left, I stood in the doorway for a long time, watching the hallway go still. The scent of roasted garlic lingered on my sleeves. I breathed it in like perfume. The next morning, I woke early. No alarm, no demand, just birdsong, the soft kind that slips through cracked windows and lands gently on your skin. I made coffee, sat on the small balcony with a blanket around my shoulders. The world moved without me needing to chase it. For once, I wasn't proving anything. I wasn't Daniel's mother, or anyone's burden, or a woman waiting to be let in. I was simply Margaret, owner of a house I no longer lived in, but still owned, landlord, survivor, friend, a woman who had once been erased and then redrawn by her own hand. Later that afternoon, I walked to the bookstore, browsed without rushing, bought a novel I'd never heard of just because the cover was blue and peaceful. I stopped by the flower stand on the way home and bought myself tulips, yellow, bright, alive, the kind no one had to send out of guilt. When I got home, I placed them in a chipped glass vase and set them by the window. And then I sat, not because I was tired, but because I finally could. If you've ever been called a burden, not to your face, of course, not always. Sometimes it's said with a sigh when you ask for a ride to the doctor. Sometimes it's in the silence when your birthday goes unmentioned. Sometimes it's the way your chair is the only one without a cushion at the family table. Sometimes it's just how they look at you when you forget something twice. If you've ever stood in the doorway of a home you built, brick by brick, choice by painful choice, and felt like a stranger in it, if you've ever walked past a hallway filled with photos of people you raised and not one of them includes you anymore, if you've ever held your tongue so long that it began to bleed into your chest and you called it peace because no one else wanted to hear the truth, then this story was for you. This story was not just about a house. It was about a woman who gave and gave and gave until they forgot she had anything left to take, until they started treating her like the floor beneath their feet, solid, silent, stepped on, expected to hold the weight and never complain when it cracked. They thought she'd vanish. But here's what they didn't understand. A woman who has nothing left to lose, has nothing left to fear, a mother who's been cast aside, becomes a force of reckoning when she finally turns around and sees what she's been carrying, and a grandmother who's been quiet too long will speak with the power of every moment she stayed silent just to keep the peace. So if they ever made you feel like you didn't matter anymore, if they ever told you, outright or in subtle ways, that your time had passed, that you should sit down, hush up, fade out, let me remind you, you are not invisible. You are not the background of anyone's story. You are not just a support beam for someone else's success. You are not a faded photograph on the mantle. You are not a leftover. You are not a mistake. You are the reason the house stood as long as it did. You are the one who paid the bills while they slept. You are the one who stayed up when they were sick and clapped when they were proud and forgave when they forgot. You have the right to say no. You don't have to accept the scraps. You don't have to smile through the insult just to keep the invitation. You don't have to be grateful for being tolerated. You don't owe them your silence. You don't owe anyone the version of you that gave and got nothing back. You have the right to take back what was always yours. Your voice, your story, your place at the table, your name on the deed, your photo on the wall, your seat in the center, not the sidelines. And maybe, most importantly of all, you have the power to rewrite your ending. Sometimes it comes with shouting. Sometimes it comes with a set of new keys, a lease agreement, a pot of tea, a dinner table full of people who choose you, not because they're obligated, but because they see you. Sometimes revenge is peace. Sometimes it's a locked door. Sometimes it's an unlocked heart. And sometimes it's simply choosing yourself after everyone else forgot to. So if this story reached you, if it made your throat ache or your eyes burn, if it reminded you of something you've been too tired to remember, then you are not alone. Not anymore. Because here at Grandma True Stories, we don't tell tales for pity. We tell them for clarity, for justice, for the women who built empires out of empty pockets and were paid back with silence. Here, we remember. We remember every comment they thought we didn't hear, every favor they forgot we gave, every birthday they skipped, every hospital stay they ignored. We remember. And now we speak. So if you have a story like mine, even just a small one, if your voice has been buried under years of doing the right thing for the wrong people, then it's time. Time to speak, time to rise, time to be heard. Subscribe to Grandma True Stories, where the quietest women in the room finally say what needed to be said. And may you never again sit in the kitchen, unless it's by choice, unless it's your kitchen, and unless your name is still on the deed. Welcome home.